Okay, here we are once again. That was a short one. I hope I hit the right button and this is going where it's supposed to go.
Yeah, we're
Whatever
recording.
it goes.
The light's on. I see it.
I know the light's on, but you can have that light on and it can mean something else, I found out. It's one of those things, John, the light can be on and nobody's home, you know? I'd kind of like to avoid that. But here we are. This is the idea of the world, part 5. It's our 6th session together, believe it or not. This has been a real marathon so far. We have one more session to go to wrap this up. In this part of the book, it's the last official part, so to speak. It's the last of the 2 peer-reviewed articles that Bernardo published prior to assembling the book. And they have, I think, 2 very interesting topics. One of them is his question as to, well, why is it if physicalism is such a weak way of expressing reality or addressing reality, why is it so dominant? Why is it that the primary view? How did we get to the point that we've come to accept that as kind of we'll call it the consensus view or the conventional wisdom? And on the other hand, once he takes care of that topic, the other article that he wrote has more to do with, well, what does all of this mean? What does an idealist ontology in and of itself mean for how we live our lives? One of the points of critique that he's had all along is physicalism doesn't really help us live our lives. Now, it's very practical in a lot of ways. If we look at materialist science, we went to the moon and we've created environmental destruction and think we're going to have some solutions to the problems or whatnot. There's a lot of practical things that come out of everyday physics and the classical view of things. But as with anything, and I think this is also true even of Bernardo's view, every view has its own limitations. They're built in. And it's helpful to explore those, and it's helpful to find out what they are. And when you realize that they're starting to get in your way, then it's time to think really seriously about them and perhaps try to revise them. But until you reach that point, there's a lot of things that can be gained. There's a lot of advantages to be had by taking a view of the world and living according to it. So what does that mean? And that's kind of what he tries to do then in the last of these chapters. So having said that much, what I'd like to do is, as usual, just open up the floor to comments, criticism, questions, and discussion points that you guys might have had while reading, or now that you've gone through the entire opus, so to speak, for these 5 parts of we've already been able to discuss. But where is it for you? The strong points are, the weak points are. What did you find most interesting, and what do you find most questionable? So let me kind of stop right with that and open the floor to real participants.
Okay, since nobody is courageous enough, I will try to begin.
Bravo, Marco.
Thank you. No, what I found especially appealing, for me at least, was the conclusion. Sometimes if you want to know the essence of a book or if a message, go right to the end, to the conclusion, and then you have an idea what's about. No? Sometimes during the read you wonder where does he go, what does he mean? But I found very, very appealing this last conclusion. Maybe it's just a paragraph. I reread it, so we put it in context. Sorry for my bad English, but that's it. In conclusion, The physicalist narrative may serve the egoic meaning needs of the intellectual elites who develop and promote it, but constitutes a significant threat to the sense of meaning of the average person on the streets. Perhaps for this reason, a large segment of society seeks meaning through alternative ontologies considered outdated and untenable by the intellectual elites, such as religious dualism. Well, I don't know about that now, but in any case, this creates a schism, with corresponding tensions between different segments of society, which may help explain the contemporary conflict between neo-atheism and religious belief. I think that he has put this very well in context. That's my analysis too. You know, everyone is thinking and saying something different about this because it is, especially now, even it's becoming even worse. I see always this. Okay, I don't know. Forget it. I don't want to put in things that. But there is clearly this division between science and a society. But this is not due to the thing that I think that people don't accept science or intellectual reasoning, but because the science as it is nowadays insists on a worldview that is essentially the physicalist, reductionist point of view, which does not convey any meaning and which is completely convinced that there is no meaning a priori, and if you believe that there is a meaning, you are substantially, well, a retrograde person living in the Middle East or something like that. And maybe history, I think, will show exactly the contrary. This is a new priest elite, which is retarding an evolutionary further step towards, well, a little bit further into the future. And I think that when he identifies in physicalism, maybe not the only one, there are also maybe also other reasons, but physicalism as such, or at least this insistence in this almost dogmatically in the physicalist idea, is perceived by society not rationally, not verbally, but they feel it inside somehow, that there is something missing. And I think that he makes a good point here. And it summarizes well the problem.
Yeah, that's very good, Marco. I like the way you laid that out. I'm going to just put it in my terms, that science seems to be and has owned answering the question how the world works. But when it comes to the other the other questions that human beings ask, why, who am I, where am I, and that they seem not to, based on what you're saying, if I hear you right, allow for the personal I of what the how affects the personal I, how something affects the personal I, and how the personal I it returns the favor, kind of thing. So I appreciate how you laid out, because I had a similar resonance with that paragraph and what he was laying out there. It really, I do have one critique, and it's probably my persnickettiness of his language in certain places where he comes across as making idealism as the ultimate superior to physicalism. That when he starts using that language, I kind of just back away and wait and see what else he has to offer. But that was the one thing I it didn't sit well with me as far as that goes. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. I think that's a common theme, no? In Kastrup, he's quite polarized, right? Against physicalism is like a crusade against physicalism. So I sympathize with him, but I also recognize after we saw that the multiple views that we can have of the same reality, okay, and there is no absolute, probably there is no absolute true view, and it's just an approximation. I think I again, once again, I tend to prefer idealism. I think it's much more, let's say, provides a much more explanation and also implications that resonate with me more than just physicalism. To be honest, the chapter, the 15th chapter, the one about meaning, is the one that I enjoy most, actually. And for me, it was a bit of a discovery. I didn't really think about that angle of meaning. And so I always appreciate Kastrup's effort in educate you know, the layman on such a wide range of topics, and the meaning one, I really enjoyed it a lot, and the way that from the physicalist perspective, meaning it's a projection that we as individuals project onto the world outside us, versus meaning as an intrinsic meaning that the world has already, because it's a mental world, okay, according to idealism. And I didn't really think about that until I read the chapter, and I really enjoyed that. And also it's an idea that resonates a lot with me. This one about meaning, where meaning comes from. It's a projection from our minds onto the world outside our minds, according to physicalism, or it's already there as part of the world because the world is mental, right? And the other aspect, okay, that one I was more familiar, and it's been always a feature, if you want, of this ontology that I always appreciated, and I don't find in physicalism at all, is the transcendence. Okay, so, and which I think it goes together with meaning, right? And I really enjoyed a lot. Also, the linking to, because I read not much, but I started reading a bit about Carl Jung's, let's say, work, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think the whole Jungian archetypes and all that, and then again back to Plato, no, with the theory of ideas and archetypes as well, right? So all this resonates a lot, and he brings all those pieces together. And the last thing that I found also very eye-opening, it's in the chapter 15 as well, is that this sentence: in a mental world, it is as unreasonable to interpret life literally as it is to interpret dreams literally. Whoever thinks that the dream is exactly what it appears to be at face value, most people's instinct upon having an intense dream is to immediately ask themselves, what does it mean? Looking upon life in the same way and asking oneself the same question can bestow on it a much more spacious, open, and wholesome outlook. And I really enjoyed this kind of conclusion. It's a much more fulfilling way to see the world than just, you know, us projecting some meaning that it's relative and cultural and individual onto the things that are out there. I found that really,
it's more open, and that's why I appreciated one word that you used in your, is you prefer idealism. That's not the same as to me as saying that idealism is the absolute mode. I mean, I prefer hot sauce on my eggs. Some people want ketchup. Okay, but it's still good to eat eggs and whatever you order, you know. So I really appreciate, because I resonated with that last sentence too, what you just said. That's a part I did resonate in this reading.
I'll jump in there. Thank you all. This helps a lot. Thank you, Marco, for taking that bit of text and explicating it a bit. So he seems to be looking at the narrative of the physicalists as a split between the elites and the average guy. And this is it isn't an equal fight. The elites have more power, it seems, in some sense, than the average guy, with their who's have alternative epistemological claims that they're making. And I think this is the audience. He has two audiences, I think he's addressing. I think he wants to attack with equal force those elites with the inequities that they're using, and he's trying to protect the average guy from this dominant worldview, which, let's face it, it is the dominant worldview right now. Although I think I think there are many more average guys and gals out there who have alternative epistemological orientations, but they don't express them or enact them the way that these elites do. I find a lot of the average people are like very tolerant of the people's differences in a way that the elites are not. The elites, you can't get tenure, you'll be thrown out, of these little brotherhoods and the ivory tower, you'll be thrown out of that ivory tower really fast if you don't maintain a kind of an orientation that is basically a physicalist one. Even though many of those persons, as soon as they leave the ivory tower and go home or go interact with their friends, drop it, And I think that's the performative contradiction that Bernardo was calling them out on, is that you can't live this. The epistemological claims that you're making, you actually can't live out of that and make adequate sense of a social world. So I think he has two audiences, and I believe he's speaking about the elites to the average guy and gal out there. And I think that's who he's wanting, that's his other audience that he's addressing. And I think he does this admirably well. I once had a philosopher friend. He was a serious German philosopher, and he knew Heidegger backwards and forwards. He was visiting New York once, and I took him out to the West Village, and there were bars where people were singing and dancing and having a lot of fun. And he and I were like sitting there on bar stools, and I was trying to tease out some of these philosophical claims that he was making in his deep existential Germanic worldview. And I was very clumsy at it because I'm not a trained philosopher at all, but I read a lot of philosophy. And I just naively said, I read philosophy because I'm interested in their personalities. I like Kant and Hegel and Socrates. They were all very vivid personalities. And that's how I read it. I just think this is very interesting because these are very colorful people, interesting people. And he thought that was kind of silly, but he also acknowledged that there's a truth to that. And, these philosophers, they have personalities, and they're trying to package package something in a way that's going to be palatable to a certain kind of inquiry. But there are many other different kinds of inquiries. And I think this is what we're sort of struggling with as we read this, because I think there are many different kinds of idealisms, and there are many different kinds of physicalisms. And ironically, I think there are certain kinds of idealisms and certain kinds of physicalisms that have the same desired outcome, which is to get off the planet. I think a lot of idealists who are oriented in a beam me up into the subtle worlds, I can bypass all this shit, and are very much acting out the same desired outcome of the physicalists who say there's only the physical world. So let's give our attention to that and manipulate it and exploit it in ways that will allow us to go to Mars and colonize the rest of the galaxy in the next 1,000 years, which I've heard physicists claim. They also say there's no such thing as a first person. I heard a physicist say this at a public gathering up in Manhattan, and he said out loud to everybody, there is no such thing as a first person account. There is only the third person. And I just wanted to ask, and I didn't because it was too intimidating. It's like, well, who is making that claim? How can you make a claim that there's only a third person if you're not, and there is no third person? That's a contradiction, a performative contradiction. And I believe Bernardo Castro very ably calls this out over and over again and pulls the rug out from under them, and and they fall on their ass. And what do? They just pick themselves up and dust themselves off and pretend like it didn't happen. And I think that's fine. They can do that, but we saw it, and and I think this is what he's saying is to the audience out there, all those average people, is like, look at them. The emperor has no clothes here. So let's stop giving them away our power, thinking that they know something that we do not, because they don't. So I think, and this is a larger question, is how do we enter into the metaphorical landscape of another person with respect and integrity when they want to devour your metaphorical landscape? And I think this is what he's calling attention to. These are all these are clusters of metaphors that people are using and manipulating. And that's a danger. It's also something that we had to call our attention to. And what do we want to have happen with all of these different kinds of metaphorical landscapes that are metaphorical in nature, but some are calling it, this is reality, and it's the only reality. Anyway, that's my spiel. It's a huge, daunting task. I think all of us are sort of engaged in. And my big question is, well, the world. What in the world is that? And the personal pronoun I, where is that? Well, that's right here. And what's the relationship between this and the world? And what is the relationship between the world and the earth? I think this is another big conundrum where many of us, whether you're a physicalist or a materialist or an idealist, have to come to terms with very quickly. It's not like we have all the time in the world to figure this out. So thank you for this opportunity to riff with you guys.
So, hey, lots of ideas going through my mind. Let's see if I'm able to do it in a coherent. So, well, I like it very much, the chapter 14, especially how he brought the psychological element, the dimension to it, and how he exposed, or how he described that it is psychological motivated. So, which means in my mind that I interpreted it that we all are humans, mortal humans, and we all want to be meaning. We all have meaning. So that was quite interesting, or that I really agree with him intuitively, and from my experience and how I see that it's how he exposed that it's like, even perhaps more than will to pleasure or will to power, we are there is a will to meaning. And then he referred to Viktor Frankl. So indeed, I think there is lots of ego investment in this, that like the paradigm that is sustained and perpetuated is ultimately can even be boiled down to the our individual motivation. So there is, in fact, there is rarely or most unlikely not like a pure science or in a vacuum from the individual. So I can see that, and the physicalists or materialists are also living their kind of story, their storyline, and it's very like in terms of the ego defenses that we can see or are manifested sometimes, as Bernard also referred to. I think I can also relate to those that I see. And then, yeah, the meaning maintenance model that he brought up from social psychology. That's it's, for me, it's really coherent observation that how and it explains. So in that sense, and yeah, the dichotomies between the I would say like the new atheism and the dual religion dualism. I didn't quite understand what he meant by religion dualism. So maybe you want to see what he might have meant by it. So yeah, I think I really liked that part of the chapter. But then when chapter 15, I had some problems. Like then when it comes to the meaning, then it like he adventures to a terrain, to a territory, which for me, I'm not sure if I can relate it that much. But then like what then is the meaning and the dreams, the symbolism, it doesn't just resonate with me so strongly that then when he strikes like what does it mean then? But I can see that idealism can indeed bring a whole another perspective and approach to life, to ourselves, and to the outer universe, how we relate to it. But then like it sounds like a bit poetically. Then for me, like I never really quite got into the Jung thing of the archetypes and the symbolism. So that's for me, it's a bit obscure. But beside that, yes, very obviously fascinating if we can start having a hermeneutics of everything based on this. So yeah, lovely. I'm all in, but I'm still a bit like back with what authors and what is these archetypes.
I want to touch into his whole notion of projection, and especially as a defense mechanism, because this is very, very relevant as far as in my personal experience that of going through trauma and then reading about projection on the psychological level, how we project onto other people, we project onto each other. And I found that really interesting, and there's a lot of truth. As a defense system, projection is used. But one thing I want to bring to the table as far as this notion of projection is that when you're in theater, you make conscious your projection. Especially when you're on a stage, you are using that, what is a defense mechanism, it seems to me, in a more creative way. And what I found in that notion of projection was, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but a thread of, by him bringing this to our attention of that defense mechanism of projection, for me, he was bringing focus of maybe that's something we need to pay attention to, even Castro, because I find him projecting in a way, when he says ultimate certain things, and I can be conscious of it without judging him, but that's in the sense that, oh, he's doing that, so I have to pay attention to that, so that I'm going to put it this way. part of my trauma made me highly sensitive, not only to my own projections, but when people were projecting onto me, just like somebody, you stand in front of a projector of a film, or you stand in front of somebody that's pissed off and they take a swing at you. They're projecting their fist at you. And that moment of being aware of that, of standing in front of the projector and feeling the light. And if you have developed sensitivities, you also feel the images. So in terms of working with this polarity between the two, how is idealism and physicalism getting lost in an interference pattern of projection? I hope I said that right. Okay, enough said.
That made sense to me. Thank you, Michael.
I had a little difficulty to understand the last part. Can you conceptually, I mean, what
Can you
do
refer
mean?
what you're saying? What do you need me to?
The last part I didn't get really. I think it was very profound, but I'm not sure if I understood it well, which is a projection. The last part.
Well,
Eventually you can rephrase it, John. So sorry if I need.
What I was getting from Michael's communication is there's a flat screen, there's light that's making images on this flat screen, and
okay.
we enter into a relationship with that. And then there's the guy on the street who doesn't like something about you and is swinging a fist at you. There's kind of a relationship between the images on a screen that's you know is a fiction, or you're a performer and you're intentionally on a stage creating images for an audience, and those confrontations like this, and you're dodging them because it's a very physical fist coming at your very physical head. It's a very different kind of relationship than when you're on a stage fighting a mock duel with someone with swords, for instance, or watching a movie of two sword fighters. But I think that's kind of, and the interference pattern. And that's where I think Michael was making a connection that made sense to me. I don't know how you respond to that, Mark.
So you mean that there is, after all, an overlap between a physicalist? Yeah, okay.
There's an overlap. There's an overlap by both of their, just using his notion about projection as an ego defense.
Projection as an ego defense. Okay, yeah.
Because they're defending. Just think of it. This is very metaphorical. Actually, I'm using the metaphor of how they defend each other against each other. Okay.
Yeah, but this might be less metaphorical than what we think or what we believe.
Well, you tell me. I just know that's where I'm coming from. So, Marco, maybe do you have enough?
From the idealistic point of view, there is no real division between the mind, the idea, and our bodies, what we call matter, the more concrete and the less concrete things. So in this context, what is a projection? Projection makes part already of this not illusionary, I don't like this word, of this idea world. So it is already an overlap and an interface between two domains, which at bottom are one still. But so we project it as a polarity.
Let me ask you, Marco, just to riff a little bit on Michael's interference pattern and how you're reading that. And what's coming up for me is in a sense, are not the idealists in the most extreme idealists and most extreme physicalists, aren't they both shadow boxing?
Yeah, we may. It's a nice image. I don't know if it fits 100%. Yeah, but it's shadow boxing. Yeah,
Since the world is
maybe.
just, both of them,
Yeah,
the world is just an idea that both of
yeah,
them have. So
shadow
what
boxing.
is it when they're
But
disagreeing with each other?
but but see, already the word physicalist. What means that a thing is physical? I don't know. As a physicist, I don't know because there is no definition that says, because a priori, if you say that everything is physical, you are no longer able to make a counterexample of what is not physical. You cannot say that something that is physical is you equate it with immaterial, for example, that has no concrete, is not a mass. So is light in physics is a massless particle, a
Yeah,
photon. It has
yeah,
no mass.
uh,
So this is immaterial, but it is physical. So what
yeah.
is physical, not physical?
Yeah. I think Bernardo describes physical as something that can be described by numbers, basically, numerical properties like mass, energy, and these sort of things. I think this is how he describes physical, which are very objective, if you want, numbers, right? This is
Yeah, but
how.
we are already in the idealistic realm because numbers are something that you don't see p grease pie under your table or there is a number 3. It is not. It is something abstract already in a mental domain.
Yes, but and I think I see your point also, Michael and John, the kind of argumentation, right? So the very fact that I think, if I understood well, the very fact that Bernardo is taking a quite, crusader position in defending idealism, it's already showing it's an example of projection. I don't know if
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
going in that
yeah.
direction. I think the thing is that and also, Marco, you made a very good question, because what is something physical, right? And Bernardo, I think he describes in several papers and places that it's that. But then you have two possible views. One is the view that you believe that there are two worlds. One is the mental world, which is the first person world. And then there is the outside world. And the outside world can be defined by these numbers and numerical properties, and which are also external, right? So it's not internal. Well, that's my assumption. Perhaps it's not. I don't know what he would say about that. And then there is the idealist, let's say, kind of view, which is that everything is mental, including the maths and all these numerical properties, etc., etc. So in a way, if you already start from that position, then I think it's very difficult then to contradict idealism. I think, right? Because then, and I would even go further, saying that, in fact, if you think about a physical thing, which is defined by certain numbers, etc., then, I mean, you could argue that this thing exists, even if it's the ultimate nature is mental. So, so in a way, physicalism is embraced or contained by idealism, right? And even I would go further. Because the ontology of Bernardo, I agree, it's a specific kind of idealism. One essential part of his ontology is that is this process of dissociation, where you have this mind at large, and then you have this, let's say, how it's not.
Alters.
Yes, the alters, okay, which are these dissociated entities, which are basically but they are contained with this mind at large. But the very, let's say, assumption of considering the dissociation as part of this idealist ontology means that you are already kind of agreeing to a third person perspective, an objective reality. So he doesn't deny that. He tries to explain how this consensus reality exists. And he also goes to quantum physics, and he tries also to provide some explanations. So I think I don't see really that idealism is going, it's either idealism or physicalism. I think the way that he's conceiving his ontology is that it would embrace physicalism. I think he's against the physicalist that claim that actually there is no mental, so basically that consciousness, for example, doesn't exist, and the first person perspective is just an illusion, and all those kind of things. I think it's a much more concrete fight that he's having. Yeah, I think he enjoys going on a trip and seeing the world and the physical world and all that, right? So
yeah,
I think
I just want to bring also this back, that his use of projection in terms of an ego defense mechanism does not negate that projection could be useful. It's a matter if you're using projection with awareness and attentiveness. It becomes a defense mechanism in the sense that you're not giving attention to how you're projecting, like when you're on stage, or like I'm projecting now. I'm projecting a certain point of view, but I'm doing it with some awareness. I think in the book, he's doing it with a very intense, and it comes across with some of his language, that crusader attitude. Sometimes I get allergic to, because it's a type of what I interpret, a type of the very thing he's claiming about the physical. It doesn't negate, once I see that and I understand that's maybe not his intention, but I see that, I can get back on track and kind of read his argument more openly. Does that make sense, Jaime? Because
yes,
I
yes,
get what you're saying,
yes.
because I like what you're saying, and also Marco. But this is the thing, is that if we take idealism and physicalism not as the same, but they're components of something larger, they're components, right? Then projection becomes about, well, which way do I move? How do I move between the points of view? How do I read the points of view and discern? I'm going to come slightly on the side of idealism, but I'm not going to deny. Sometimes physicalism makes, because of lack of first person and everything's meaningless, comes across to me like, well, my pain's not real. Losing, having a human experience is not, they make me inhuman sometimes, or I feel inhuman from their point of view, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can I respond, or is someone else want to respond?
No, go ahead, John. Then.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. How do I begin? Okay. Well, as this is a presupposition that I'm operating from, and I think he does too, that as language users, speaking of the same language, and with entangled, that entangles our minds. And what do entangled minds want to have happen? I think that this is something I think he's drawing upon. As we disentangle the brain equals mind metaphorical construct the physicalists are addicted to, as you disentangle from that, then what happens? Well, the paranormal, the telepathic, lucid dreaming, all of those reports that many have made those reports throughout history from almost every culture. They have an ontological status of reality. But if you're only going to maintain that the brain equals the mind, epiphenomena, mind is just epiphenomena, just like steam off of a kettle, then all of that is illusion. And we, if we have enough authority, can diagnose you and put you into a loony bin because you're just hallucinating. And that's basically what religion is. It's just massive hallucination. And so we who have the power to do so can take resources and channel them into certain kinds of programs that we approve of, like going to Mars. Rather than feeding people who are starving, let's take our resources that have been created collectively and use those resources to express a program for a very limited elite. Because I'm not going to be on one of those spaceships. You know? And also the incredible folly that many people in the scientific community are saying that makes no sense at all. When you have a very complex organism with a brain and a body in an environment, you can't just beam it up to another, because you and I and all of us with brains and bodies and environments, these are very delicate relational, all of these delicate relationships cannot be taken up to another planet. This is ecological, and this is basic 101 ecology. So for them to make the claim that what they're doing is science is bullshit. It's not science. It's mytho-poetics is what they're doing. And they've watched way too much Star Trek. And I think it's, you know, this whole idea of a warp drive, we're going to go right through a wormhole and 10 seconds later be in another, I think it's bullshit that they think we can pull this off and that we should use our limited resources in a planet that's in peril to promote these programs. I think it's loony. And I love Elon Musk. I think he's a very creative guy, but I think he's out of his mind. And I think Bill Gates is out of his mind too. If he thinks we can improve the immune system with some bogus vaccine, which has already killed lots of people in India. They've had these experiments using these vaccines. And I think it's you know, these kinds of experiments that I think we want to have are safe to fail experiments, where whether if you have an experiment and it fails, it's going to collapse the civilization. It's not such a good idea. So I think these are the kind of things that are important for us to consider. And also the interior, and I think there's a collapse that happens with the physicalists who say there's only the collapse between the internal and the external. There's also the interior and the exterior. And I think these are very subtle distinctions so that you and I, through language, which entangles our minds, can co-evolve together when we have different narratives. And if we're not caught in a drama triangle where there's a rescuer, a victim, a perpetrator, a rescuer, that drama triangle will sap all of our energies very quickly. So I think he is in the drama triangle. He is I think his role, we've talked about as a crusader, I think he's very addicted to the role of the rescuer. And he wants to rescue the average guy from the perpetrators of these certain kinds of physicalists. And I think he's in this drama triangle, and I think he's intentionally accepted this role. But I hope that ultimately we get off of the drama triangle as quickly as possible, so we can all of us do something different. Because this drama triangle has dominated our public discourse and our allocation of resources for the last 200 years, and we're running out of gas. So what do we want to do very different? I say, I hope and I pray that we can, when the drama triangle rears its ugly head, can we turn the drama triangle, rescuer, victim, hero, into a drama circle so that we're in a mandala shape rather than a triangle shape? And then what would happen if we had a drama circle? where, okay, someone on the periphery of that circle can go into the center of it and act out. You can give them a spotlight, they can do a solo, and then they can go back to the periphery, and another character on the periphery can go into the center, and they can have their solo in the spotlight. We can take turns having a solo, and out of the interplay of all those different solos, then what happens? I think then we have the shift between a personal pronoun I and a collective we space starts to open up. So I would invite us to consider the mandala of the self, rather than getting trapped in this eternal drama triangle where we take turns perpetrating, take turns rescuing, take turns being a victim. I mean, every day, the role you get to play in this drama triangle changes. So anyway, that's my rough kind of rehearsal for an alternative epistemology, ontology that could be workable in these complex, unstable times. If everything was working fine, we wouldn't have to worry about this at all. But I think we're trying to apply very simple kinds of epistemologies to something that's incredibly more complex, and we're going to crash and burn real fast if we haven't already. And maybe there's something else that could possibly emerge out of the ashes of this collapsing civilization. Thanks.
I just want, before you go, Marco, in response to Johnny's, what he just gave out, I have a simple response to the drama triangle. Until we learn how to relate to our natural defense mechanism within the body that feels threatened, whether it's from a tiger or a loss of love or somebody's different meaning, until we learn about our own defense system and how we defend ourselves, our personal I, we won't move from a triangle to a circle. Because that's where for me, that's where the crux is how we get defended and feel threatened on so many different levels, learned and biological. That's all I want to add to that, because I support everything you said, John, but that is one of the key components that we need to include if we're to move forward. Sorry, Marco, I had to get that
No,
out.
it's okay. No, you just gave me 1 point more to point out. Yeah, I like very much that, Johnny, you raised this issue with Mars, because this is also one of my fixations. There are three: Mars, artificial intelligence, and some sort of reductionist medical science that I always have. I get nervous when they are sustained with full force by not only the pharmaceutical or whatever industries, but it is a mindset in society in general. I think we don't need to see higher powers who are dominating us and we are the poor victims. I think it's unfortunately these things are already the outcome of a certain, reflects the manifestation of a certain physicalist attitude. I don't want to say that physicalism is now the culprit of everything. There are also other aspects in our life that should be considered. But this idea that we send people to Mars and they save humanity and the human race will continue. And I find it so rubbish, because if we don't change ourselves innerly, something of our human nature, all the ghosts, the fears, the traumas that we have here, we will export them to Mars, and all the story will begin from the beginning, again. And so it will not solve the problem. But this is a physicalist point of view that is utterly unable, as you already said, to take this first person. The typical physicalism is is an expression of a human being that is not able to know himself or themselves. When you don't know yourself, you just automatically believe that every solution is out of you. You don't look in you, and you don't see your, as you said, Michael, you inborn and learned defense mechanisms. You don't see them. You just react with your reptile brain, which obviously is just a label. It's not a technical term. But in any case, and why are we so fixated? Is our society so fixated with artificial intelligence? They were, and now I see now some doubts are raising. People are slowly beginning to doubt that, well, it will not probably turn out to be that easy as we imagined. Why? Because there is, again here, the mind-brain identification as a physicalist. If our mind is obviously is just only a physical computer, maybe not just a digital computer, but a neural network, deep learning neural network, well, we are just there. We are now only the last step, and then we will have the humanoid, the self-driving car, the super highly intelligent machine. But where does this conviction come from? They will tell you, oh, why, you see, there was this, what's the name of the Google Go supercomputer, which beat the world champion in Go play. And therefore, you jump to the conclusion, no, it won't work because your mind is not your brain. So that's what the non-physicalists say. It's the idealist. And if we are right as idealists, then automatically artificial intelligence will not be that what you hope. This doesn't mean that artificial intelligence might have some applications, of course. It will have some application. It has already applications. But I think to a large degree it is a self-delusion. And these things prevent us to go forward. Instead, they see this as a great bright future. It will be exactly the contrary. We will sooner or later realize that we lost a lot of opportunities to go beyond, to go towards the future, and we got stuck because we were in our physicalist mindset. The same for medicine. I think I'm not against medicine as such, as it isn't, but to see us only as a biological machine, where every time that I have some ailment, some problem, some illness, I have to go to a doctor and I have to repair this corporeal machine. This is a mindset that prevents us from seeing beyond, that maybe our body is more than just as a maybe an example that I do every time that I wanted to make this example, then I forgot, but some of you know that another fixation that I have is education, the issue with education. No? So if instead seeing the brain just as a machine that you must put into information into the children, a lot of information to learn, acquire skills, prepare you for the big future, of course, with robots that will do everything for you. So I just wonder what will this education be useful for. No? But these contradictions, they don't see them immediately. But instead, just let us take for a moment, well, it's maybe not really an idealist point of view, but it is already a spiritual point of view, where you see the child as a growing soul. Not a brain that is growing, but a soul that is growing. And if you take this point of view, only by taking this point of view, that gives also the answer, what is it, what are all these philosophical ruminations useful for at last in the practical life? Well, they could be useful, for example, in education, where you see the child, which is a growing soul, and you don't have to tell this soul what is good for it or not. What you should do is to create externally at physical level, from the physical point of view, and from the author point of view, also as an emotional and psychological point of view, an environment that allows the children to find by himself or herself their soul mission, their soul how do you say this? The desire of the soul, how it wants to develop, in what direction, without us telling it. Yeah, the last time for some videos ago, Jamie, you said the mint subjects. Yeah, we should not impose just you do this. Maybe you're a great musician. Let the soul decide what it is good for you. No? And maybe it could also be a mathematician or a physician. Why not? So there's no contradiction in. But if you take this point of view, just only this philosophical, ontological point of view, everything changes also in the practical world, from the practical point of view. And that's why I say physicalism is a break, an evolutionary break, in the sense of it is it's creating a lot of friction to go a step beyond. And that's the problem, that in our materialistic mindset, it's very difficult to convey and to explain.
I have a response to that. Did Jaime go for it? Did you have something to say, Jaime?
I go after you, John.
Okay.
No problem.
Please forgive me. I sort of sometimes just barge right in there and forget that other
Exactly.
people are waiting to say something. I just wanted to respond to something Marco was bringing up. And I think this is a larger question. You mentioned medicine and education. And I believe that the current paradigm, which is a physicalist one, is predominantly driven by a battlefield organization. So the immune system is seen as a defender of the organism's identity. And it's the agent of change is always out there. It's a virus. And we have to arrange an environment where the organism can be equipped with certain machinery that can shoot the virus and kill it and zap it. So we give it a pill, we give people pills, or we perform surgery. And he's saying, I think this comes out of a battlefield dynamic. And Western medicine is dominated by battlefield dynamics, where there's an emergency, the soldier has fallen and is broken, we need to fix him and get him out on the battlefield as soon as possible. That's what's dominating our medicine today. And the pharmaceutical companies have exploited this and made billions of dollars. They do not want to find a cheap alternative, like an herb that could be growing in a rainforest somewhere in South America that could heal millions of people, because they wouldn't make any money off of it. So they're going to stop that from happening and call it Looney Tune. Meanwhile, back in the laboratory, they're concocting these cocktails, basically, that they experimentally give to people, which destroys their bone marrow and does all kinds of other awful side effects, and drives them mad. They do them chemotherapy or something like that. This whole idea, like, cut it out, or let's kill it, let's zap it. And there's another way of thinking of we can create other metaphors, such as a very ancient metaphor that the immune system, or the person, is a sound system. So there's sound body, sound mind. The organism is vibratory, and the immune system is a musical event that's happening with other entities. So the microbial world does not, there's certainly elements of defense, but there are certain elements of cooperation between the microbial world. And it doesn't have to be a war. We're filled with viruses and bacteria, which our evolution requires. And I think this is the trouble we're in, especially when we take those battlefield metaphors into education, where your function is to get the kid a job in a competitive marketplace, which is where winners take all. And let's create that good little soldier to go out there and fight that battle so that we can maximize profits for, you know, short-term goals of a corporation. And I think that use of the educational system is creating a disaster. So I think if we can wean ourselves away from these battlefield metaphors, we would be doing ourselves and our children and our grandchildren an enormous favor. And I think I think I've probably said enough, and I'll press the pause button here. But I think we're I think the epidemic, the pandemic that we're all being confronted with collectively, I think we're all right in this together. I think we're all gazing into the abyss together, rather than this group has to suffer and that group has to suffer, but we can be the winners. We're going to escape from this suffering if we can externalize it to other groups that aren't connected to us. That's a delusion that I think some of us are starting to face. And so in a way, I'm okay with the battlefield metaphor, because I think that is a battlefield. And I think we do need to protect ourselves from the contagion and the toxicity of these thought viruses that are polluting our metaphorical landscapes. And I hope we're using this technology today to do something different from that widespread tendency to use this technology for nefarious purposes. So I think it's a tough one. Which metaphor works best for us, or you, or me, depends on the context that we're in. Anyway, thank you all so much.
Thank you, John. And yeah, yeah, that's a good question. What is the metaphor that is going to work best for us? I fully agree with Marco. You're also fixations. I've been because it's been a topic that has interested me a lot. So computer science and artificial intelligence, etc. But I had the intuition since ever that we were not going to be able to build a machine that suddenly one day would wake up and say, hey, you know, and start behaving like a human being. But also, and that's the difficult part, how you know that that machine would have a first-person experience. So I never conceived in artificial intelligence we could achieve that. By the way, I asked that question in a tweet to Bernardo on one of these, his latest, I think it was a podcast that he wrote. Not fully sure why I asked this question to him, but I'm not fully sure, let's say his ontology, it's incompatible with the fact or the possibility. Actually, that was the question, whether he saw the possibility that one day we could build an organism that could, you know, be conscious, right? So whether his ontology was compatible with that possibility. So basically to create an artificially intelligent but also conscious organism. Because the way that he, let's say, sees consciousness developing in these dissociation processes, and he ties that to living organisms, so to biologically, metabolically active organisms. So, okay, maybe it's not a machine like a PC, okay, that we are using, very powerful, not even a quantum computer, but could be something that still would be man-made, whether that could be a possibility. But he didn't answer that tweet. So I'm not fully sure if he didn't want to really, if he's got a view, or he didn't want to give a view. So on one hand, I agree with you, Marco, that I don't think, so using normal computers and even quantum computers, etc., we would achieve this kind of artificial intelligence that Elon Musk believes that one day will happen. But on the other side, I'm not fully sure an idealist ontology also would prevent humans to develop conscious organism one day. So that is not coming out naturally, right? I don't know. For me, it's a question mark, and I don't know the answer. I asked Bernardo for his view, but he didn't answer. On the medical and also education, but on the medical, I fully agree that this worldview of seeing the body as a like a machine, and anything can be repaired pretty much. And actually today you're going to be able, I think there are already some activity going on printing, 3D printing, you know, live tissues, so that you need a kidney, then you get a kidney printed, this sort of stuff. I think it's, I read a few articles recently by some doctors saying that we live in the era of over-medicalization. So anything, you know, that before was completely, you know, nobody would have paid attention, and probably you would have even passed away, and then in the autopsy they would have seen several tumors and etc. That today, because you have super machines that are able to detect the infinitesimal kind of tumor that you may have, okay, and then suddenly you get the story that that tumor will kill you someday, so it's better to remove it. Sorry, I think it's the completely wrong direction. And also the fact that that there is this missing connection between the mind and the body. Okay, so this self-healing, and also how you're thinking and your emotions can also impact on your physiological and biological and on your body. So I think this is also something that it's dismissed, right, for on today's medicine. So I fully agree with that, and that's the reason that I see idealism and the proposal from Kastrup much more embracing and open to accommodate all these things that, by the way, I think it's many of that is ancient wisdom, right? So it's nothing that you know, it's to be discovered. There are lots of things that are there, but the current science, and again, science for me, it's a very nice method, okay, to gain some knowledge of this consensus reality that we have. And so I'm fully supportive of that, and I like very much also the inquiry method of science. It's what goes beyond is the metaphysics of physicalism, and then dismissing anything else that is not really matter, right? And which I don't think science actually, that's the conclusion of a scientific, true scientific inquiry is not that one. I don't think the conclusion is that all what is out is there, it's matter, and mind is just, it's not. And all those physicalists that and mind scientists, etc., that claim that, I'm sorry, they talk about this is what science says, this is what scientific experiment. No, sorry, those are assumptions and theories that you believe can explain certain experiments, but from those experiments you cannot say then that's the conclusion and that's it, right? So
did you want to say something, Daniel?
Well, just a brief note that regarding to Bernardo as a person, I've heard him saying that he's a bit tired already to being in that crusader or rescue role, that he personally would like even like to go more into the meaning, to try to make sense that what does it mean, that what does the sun might be eventually telling us or something like that. So he's and apart from that, I really like this analysis, beautiful, these metaphors, and I really believe in the narrative component of the thing, of the metaphor. So I like this prism, this perspective to approach this. And then I'm always thinking of like this metaphor that Bernardo, he itself has this of the whirlpools, right? So we are individual whirlpools, but we are connected. And so in that sense, like there is really this system, you know, there's a family system therapy, well, that even mental pathologies or mental imbalance in symptoms, they manifest really in the systematic, like we inside a family organism or in the system. So that, I think those things, they allude or they point really that about this interconnectedness. But yeah, maybe I leave it there because it's a very complex and eternal. But yeah, really this holistic thing in medicine, in the way we think, approach our relation to nature and all those things.
Yeah, and so I may be throwing something on this table that I hope, and it has to do with being influenced of what the state of the world is going through right now, and being sheltered and staying home. And it seems to me that any perspective, and I mean any, whether it's physicalist or materialist or idealism, is grounded in facing into the real existential fact that we die, but also dying represents going into what is unknowable, what we can't know, what is beyond us. And I think sometimes the state of the world and the history of humankind is we don't have a very good relationship with death of any kind. I'm not just saying our physical death, I mean just death in the sense of relationships or change of life that we go through. This pandemic and staying at home has made me very aware of that. But I do enjoy coming to these cafes because they're a way for me to they're a way for me to modulate the anxiety about what's happening, because there's a death, there's a type of death happening in the world, and it's beyond me. I have in the last 9 years, I've had nothing but personal death of people that I've lost. So I'm highly sensitive to it. But at this time, I'm having to use these methods of being in conversation with people to help me modulate not being overwhelmed by it. So I don't know why I dropped that in, but it just felt right to speak up. Thank you.
And when you're overwhelmed by it, Michael, can you put your hand on your belly button and relax and breathe? That's right.
Thank you, John.
And, you know, I think that the touch and we can touch ourselves in gentle ways. And that can sort of be a reminder of when we were touched when we were children by people who were taking care of us. Remember the way your mother would talk to you when she was really proud of you, the sound of her voice, and you felt it in your body. And remember being rocked back and forth in that rocking chair, you know, by grandma or grandpa. So there are our mind. I loved what you said about the family systems, Daniel. And I believe and I think our family constellations. And we're not just DNA that programs the organism to respond to instructions, but there's increasingly our awareness of epigenetics and how influential they are on changing our genetics. So I think this is where a certain, where trauma gets passed down intergenerationally, not through genetics, but through the stories and the narratives and the responses to those stories and narratives that a family has about itself and passes on. So grandma and grandpa may be dead and gone, but there's still a presence in the family constellation that they operate in strange kind of ways. There's a lot of, and I think there's a lot of science that confirms this. As epigenetics has become such a hot topic in the last 2 decades, I guess, since the Human Genome Project, the intentions behind it pretty much flopped because they thought they were just going to be able to you know, co-opt the DNA and predetermine who was going to get a certain disease and create ahead of time drug therapies. And they found out very quickly that the Human Genome Project was proving that that's not going to be possible. So they've had to rethink biology in just the last couple of decades. And I think these are very interesting kinds of developments, and the new kind of biology now, and the new kind of physics is starting. It has been going on for a century already. And I think we're taking little baby steps. And I think this is, so I think the family and the traumas that have been passed on from generation to generation. We think about world wars, World War I and World War II. Those wars are not over. They're still in our system. And who knows if we have a world depression, if this slides, not just into a big recession, which is pretty obvious it will, to a world depression, will there be another war to accompany that? There are some people who are still alive who remember the Second World War and the First World War. There are fewer of them because they're older generation. That silent generation is dying. But the baby boomers are going to be going next. And how are we going to transmit these experiences that can only be learned first person, you know, from, and I think this is so poignant because I don't think our technology is going to replace that kind of memory that comes from a family, grandma telling a story to the grandkids. And I think we're in real big trouble if we think we can bypass all that and reprogram our genes and, you know, pop a pill. So I think so I'm just bringing that into the mix here because I think there's a lot of opportunities here to redirect our attention, our shared attention to other features of our landscape, of our social landscapes, rather than getting fixated in these, you know, into the drama triangle and squandering our precious time in our collective, using our collective imaginations to do something different. And I don't know that doing something different would be doing something better necessarily. So I do believe our discernment and our capacity to work rationally is very important, but it can't be the only intelligence that we draw upon. There are other intelligences as well, the magical, the mythical, and I think we need to, and the archaic intelligences, we need to draw upon all of that right now in a non-combative way, I think. So thank you once again.
Yeah, and I just want to add that as I was listening to John, I think part of my motivation is to keep this in terms of a holistic conversation. Because I think in listening to our exchanges of views and everybody and listening to the different metaphors and stuff, the one about the battlefield struck me as, you know, tapping into that defense mechanism, and it's biological, it's social, and how that, not understanding that in a, pardon the expressions, but Jesus's comment of turning our swords into plowshares and, you know, cultivating some, I don't even know what to call it, but within the human species, and its relationship to the earth, this holistic approach. And I know it's difficult because we're not used to it, because holism takes us beyond, without leaving behind, but is beyond the either or type of thinking, and maybe even the way we act too.
Maybe I just catch up this last issue here with the holistic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
There is an interesting problem in the philosophy of mind that is the so-called binding problem, which is, it is absolutely unexplainable how our brain sees a lot of different things. For example, you see a color of an object in one part of your brain, the form of the object in another part of the brain, and it is absolutely unclear how we perceive in our conscious experience the object and the color as one single entity. This is just an example. There are a lot of such examples where is it the brain? Question mark. Or if it is a brain, how does it manage to do things like that? So I think this is just one, and I think the holistic perspective is already our inner nature, which is broken down at our physical level. But if we go to the source, the holistic perspective is the original source, which for some weird, I don't know what it could be, but we perceive the world as fragmented when it is not. So I think this holistic thing is an inner remembrance of what has already been there. That's not something that we have to build. And here I like to connect this with the point of Jamie, who spoke about artificial intelligence and how can we be sure that we may be not able to build an organism. Well, I don't have the crystal ball and I cannot see in the future. I'm not a prophet, so I can only speculate myself. But first of all, I would like to point out there is one thing that is absolutely evident already with the machines of today. I clearly see that they don't understand meaning, the semantic content of things. Take, for example, also quite developed and in a certain sense also impressive the translations. When you make translations from one language, automatic translations, they do it through Google, you make it with neural networks, deep learning systems, blah, blah, blah. You can already, through the internet, use the most modern neural network translators from one language to, and sometimes it's quite impressive. I say, wow, that's almost human. But then, if you employ this consequently and you use it, not just check some phrase, you clearly see that this machine here doesn't understand the thing, what it is translating. There's no something, no mind, no consciousness, no entity that understands the meaning, the semantic content of what it is translating from A to B. That's something where artificial intelligence has made zero progress since the times of the first pocket calculator from the 50s. And yeah, John, you wanted to.
I just
agree
want to respond, not just semantic meaning, but pragmatic meaning. They cannot understand. Computer cannot understand a joke. I might say something verbally and I might raise my eyebrow to let you know that I'm not serious. How in the fuck is the computer going to register that? Through what sensorium is it going to express itself or receive a message? It's ridiculous.
I think Searle came with this Chinese room kind of thought experiment. And even if you would get really a super good machine that would be able to not understand, but to process the kind of joke and double meaning and all that, because I think there was this IBM Watson machine that beat on this very popular contest. How is it called? I mean, beat the winner of that how is it? It's basically a contest where let's say instead of asking a question, you go to you say the response, and then you have to come up with a question, right? Very really subtle and complex, and IBM Watson machine could win. But the question is whether it has any understanding of that. I think Bernardo Castro put it, I like very much his analogy of a computer simulating the function of a kidney
Yeah.
to the most infinitesimal detail, but still that computer is not going to pee on the keyboard. So I think it was really a very nice kind of analogy. The same. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
But I wanted to not to give an answer because nobody knows the answer for sure. But working hypothesis. The question: if we will be able to build a machine that has mind, is conscious. Well, I think we will be able to do that if we will understand the real relationship between consciousness, mind, and matter, the brain. When we understand how is it possible that a brain becomes conscious, or is it the brain that becomes conscious, or is it something else that gets awareness of the physical world through the brain, for example, or I don't know. I think sooner or later we will end up in some form of dualism or multilism. I don't think that consciousness is material. But however it is, as long as we will not be able to solve this problem of the mind-body problem and the so-called hard problem of consciousness, then I think we will never be able to build this machine. If we will be able to find out the solution to this problem, then I will be more open that this kind of machine can be built. But I don't think we will dribble it without in the frame of physicalism. I really don't think. I mean, it is already almost obvious. I mean, they are actually. I'm making a lot of research about the brain functions because I'm not a neurologist, so for me a lot of things are new. But you know that there are people where you cut their brain in two. They have a split brain, huh? But they have maybe also some disorders of some type, but they conduct a relatively normal life, and they have not split self. They are not two consciousness. There is still one consciousness. And try to saw the motherboard of your computer in two pieces, and then let me know if it still works. And there are also children to whom they have taken away half of the brain. You can do this only when they are young, but because otherwise they don't have neuroplasticity and so on. But they live with half of the brain. There's no report of half self or half consciousness or diminished awareness, and they mostly work well. Then there is these cases of the hydrocephalus. This is people who have substantially all the brain full of water and only a thin slab of brain remaining left. If you see the RMI scans, it's almost completely empty skull. And these are people who have a normal life, they have a job, they have a family, children, and nobody suspected anything until they made these scans and so on. So I think there is so much already there out there that it's not. I don't claim that this is a conclusive proof. You can in a physicalist point of view, try to explain to conjecture and say, oh, that's all neuroplasticity and so on, so on. You can find for an escapade to explain this also inside the physicalist paradigm. But I think we should rethink about things. We should consider also alternatives. We should open ourselves perhaps to other possible alternative way of understanding how our consciousness-brain relationship is. And when this will happen, then maybe we will have also a question to your answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was more, to be honest, not that I'm super interested in finding the answer to that question. It's not the most, no, but it was because I've seen that one of the topics that are cause confrontation between physicalists and idealists is precisely the idea of artificial intelligence and creating and in the end, I don't think the idealist ontology prevents that you could create that. Not interested in that, to be honest. For example, Michael, your point about death, for me, it's much more interesting than how we have lost really that kind of thinking about death that our ancient people used to have and used to live with, right? So cemeteries, for example, before were something much more relevant and more important, etc., etc. Today, I mean, you just want to get rid of the dead body as soon as possible and, burn it and that's it and it's gone. And with that, by the way, also that person, okay? So it's everything, it's gone, basically. And that is the physicalist kind of a paradigm claim, basically. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I brought Socrates in last session, right? But it's on the death kind of thinking that he had. I really love that one. I think Socrates was a genius in that sense, and yeah, and this is the way. But I also agree, and I think it's very wise what you've said, is that it's basically going into the unknown. Actually, for me, I love what you said, Michael, because it's going into the unknown. We cannot know that because of I think it's almost by definition, by principle, okay? We cannot know that. But when you say going into the unknown, means that we are going somewhere that we don't know, but it's let's say it can be known, not as a living organism in this stage of life, but in the future. And this is the reason that I like very much what you just said. I think it's even better than what Socrates came up with.
Well, and it's also acknowledging what going into unknown. It's safe to assume, I'll put it this way, it'll be different than I know now. It'll be different. And so I'm leaving open, something, but I don't know what that is going to be like. And the other thing, excuse me.
Yes.
One of the things that my trauma has taught me, that turning towards your defense mechanism or your anxiety about death actually makes you more able to defend yourself in a peaceful way. It's kind of paradoxical. Then you can defend yourself, but you're not coming from a place of combativeness. You're just dealing with the situation as it is needed. Whatever is needed in the moment. Once you have kind of made peace, and I'm not saying there's an absolute place that I'm at peace with death, but I've reached a point that death doesn't scare me. The only thing that scares me is how I'm going to die. Oh, God dang, that scares me. But not death. Just to put a spin on it, that's all.
Right, I think death is a very big taboo, but and the anxieties of I mean, death doesn't bother me, it's dying that gives me a problem.
Yeah.
And that's because I've held the hands of so many people. when they were going through that process. And I've been very privileged to have taken a journey with several individuals. There's a near-death experience, and then there's also certain kinds of relationships that I believe transcend and include that. So that who is dying here? Is it that person in the hospital room on that? Or is there something else going on other levels? I think that the phenomenon near-death experience, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, telepathy, UFO abductions, you know, all of these are the weird and the uncanny, healing at a distance, you know, but also, and of course, some people, materialists, hardcore, would just take all of that off the table and just say it doesn't exist, which makes their lives much easier. You know, they don't have to deal with all that complexity. But those of us who've had these anomalous experiences, I think it reframes the whole idea of the social phobia, of the phobias around death, which are so, I think, childish, actually. You're just afraid of the dark, that's all. But the dark is beautiful. The dark is absolutely necessary if there's going to be light. There's a relationship between dark and light. That's very beautiful. And I think the next frontier is not going to Mars. I believe the next frontier is sleep. When you go into, where do you go when you go to sleep at night? This is a very old metaphor for death. What is the relationship between sleep and death? And what happens when you wake up the next morning? What do you remember? Do you remember nothing? Some of us remember quite a lot. And that can be cultivated and trained as if it's valuable to a culture, to pay attention to the polyphasic nature of our biology. Or are we just going to be monophasic? We're only paying attention to what happens in the waking state, and certain very narrowly focused waking states. There's a lot going on in our waking states that is not front and center in a physicalist orientation. So I think all of these things are up for grabs. For me, I love that someone has mentioned that Bernardo is weary of this rescue, of this crusader role. I think he's tired of this triangle, this drama triangle, as many of us are. And I believe we're sort of experimenting here with what would be an alternative or an alternate reality to this dominant paradigm, which is so entrenched in battlefield and trauma and the battlefield and the battle and the fit. I think trying to think about these things are very difficult, and we do have to sort of be tolerant of the ambiguity and the cognitive dissonance that's created. Many of us have premature cognitive commitment. We've already made up our minds, and it's sometimes very hard to be open to other possibilities. And most of us will not do that unless we have an emergency, unfortunately. And I think that emergency is already here, and it will. And I think the pandemic is it's the beginning of a string of emergencies we should expect. And I think a lot of people are going to have to make a shift, and quickly, and it's not going to be pleasant. But I think the more of us who are tolerant, this person, you know, is having a hard time, understandably, and he or she needs to be, what kind of support do they need? I think this is going to be a different kind of elite than the one that's dominating the physicalist discourse right now, and trying to shove it down everyone's throat. So, you know, in a way, I think we can open our hearts and minds to those persons who are embedded in this kind of physicalist orientation. What a nightmare they're living. What a impoverished world that they must live in. And I have a feeling of like hope for them. Yeah, I'm not going to give away my power to them, but I do have I do feel some compassion for the Patricia Churchlands, and they're really, it's just very sad that they're ignoring so much that's going on around them and within them. So I hope we can start thinking in terms of exploring inner space, not to negate the outer space, but where is the beginning and the end of the inner and the outer? We, I think, are not really clear at all about the inside and the outside. I think the inside and the outside is, for us, most of the time, very fluid. And we try to freeze reality to make it conform to a very thing orientation, which I think obviously is not. So thanks once again for this opportunity to sort of put all this out on the table and start to reorganize our behaviors in a way that frees us from this drama triangle into something that could be a circle, and a circle within circles within circles, because I think there are para-realities and meta-realities. There's above and there's the adjacent. And how do we work with these? It's sort of like, and what's coming to me is that cross, and Christ on the cross, because I think that there's that cosmic Christ, which some of us are very drawn to, because we're going to need some metaphors and some motifs and some themes that we've learned, so we can take a leap into a new cosmology. You just don't go into a new cosmology with nothing. You have to, I think, find something that you can, that touches you or moves you, that can allow you to go into this new and unexplored territory. So thanks.
Well, I think also bringing the past, some of the ancient ways of thinking, and I'm mainly thinking of indigenous peoples who have not separated themselves from Earth. You gave the sound of touching, my horror of being they've done studies that when you touch your body, the body doesn't know whose hand it is. And that's significant because, in some ways, in some ways we've lost touch with that simple of how to soothe ourselves because of the way of distraction and so much mechanicalization of this organic body, and so at the same time, I hear what you're saying, John, about new metaphors. For me, just me, I found that I'm attracted to metaphors that have existed in ancient times that work better than now, probably because the metaphors in society now are so mechanical. And so I'm contrasting, drawing that, and maybe to me it's a childlike way of playing with objects, playing with nature. So yeah, I do agree that death is kind of just brings front and forward that aspect. Dying is going to take place. Are you ready for it to happen? Are you prepared for it? Because Stephen Jenkinson, who I follow a lot, that worked in the death trade, he's trying to bring, and he was alongside like you with people that were dying. He has a very storyteller way of trying to break through the phobia of death and honor the grief that is part of life from an indigenous point of view. They don't separate the two like we do. They're different functions, but they're part of a whole. So I hope that works.
Yeah, to the dying, I would like also to recall the fact that there are, well, one can also see dying metaphorically, Okay, of course, you were talking about the physical dying, and if I would know that tomorrow I'm going to die, I will be scared to death, and right. I wouldn't be very open to metaphors or things. Yeah. But having said that, it is also true that we say that dying to ourselves is not considered something negative. Is considered a new development of personality, of something that in you grows towards a new dimension. Yeah? And
Yeah.
maybe also the physical dying has
Yeah.
this function. Yeah?
Well,
So
Jenkinson makes the point that it's only with death that life exists.
yeah,
It's part of evolution or whatever you want to call it, and it's also been part of my practice that's helped me, because Zen has a saying: when you sit on the cushion, die, 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 die
yeah, exactly.
before you die.
Die to your ego.
Yeah, basically you're dying to its influence as a defense mechanism. I think it's okay as a function to get across the street, but as a function, it works, and we need it very much.
Yeah.
I just want to add, I know we're running out of time and people may want to make a summary statement here. My summary statement would be, yes, let's transcend the ego, and then let's come back to planet Earth and use that ego to channel what you've learned beyond it. Rather than let's just dissolve the ego and go off into the field of all possibilities. I think that's disaster. Maybe, maybe not. But I think that's the challenge for a lot of those who've have a tendency towards spiritual bypassing. And I have been one of those persons. And that's what's I've been taught by persons holding hands with people who are dying. It's like, don't take this body for granted. You won't have it for very long. And your ego is very much a part of that body.
Yes.
And it's not a mistake the universe has made to create such creatures as ourselves. We have a purpose, and a very important one. And we need to use our egos and be transparent to the ego, but let's not try to annihilate it. That's stupid.
That's very true, John. That's very true, John, and I'm with you on that take. I'm with you on that take.
Exactly. No, I fully agree too. Yeah.
Just picking up on what John said, if anybody has any, does anyone have any last words to say?
Yeah, I noticed you were in the dark all the time, so just wondering.
I live in the dark, Marco.
You live in the dark. You're not very active today. You're just wondering if everything is fine.
No, it is. Actually, everything is fine. One of the things, there's no way that you can summarize a discussion like we just had here for the last 2 hours. But one thing did strike me through all of this, and that is, we can want drama triangles to disappear, and we can complain about the dominance of the physicalist paradigm, or whatever it is that, however we want to express that. But what struck me about this is two things, actually. One, Mr. Kastrup got all of his articles published actually without problem. It's not like he spent years trying to do this. He might have spent months trying to do it, but he got them there because there is a certain openness. There are chinks in the armor, if you will, of that paradigm that appears to be so dominant. So that's one side of it. And yeah, he may be weary of his crusader role, but my feeling is you asked for it, you got it. That's what you would set out to do that. Now you have to live with it. That's just part of the deal. I'm real sorry about it. I feel for you. I'll give you a pat in the back and I'll buy you a beer, but you got to, it's not over. The other thing is, none of us that are here believe any of that physicalist paradigm. We may have different views on what it is, and we may not agree in the detail of things, but we haven't bought into that. We all know that there are alternatives, and we make use of them, and we employ them. And we employ them here in our little discussions that we have with one another, and I'm pretty sure, I'm almost willing to bet that all of you do this in your everyday lives. So it's not like we're not evangelizing to the world around us that things can be different than they are. So I'm not so down in the mouth about how dominant this paradigm might be. I think It's got to go through its last vestiges. It's going to have its last throes, and it's going to zappel, as the Germans would say. There's just going to be a lot of movement before it goes away, but it's going to go away because it can't sustain itself. It's reached its limits. It's served its purpose. It's done its duty. I think we should appreciate what it's done and move on. And we don't have to do any more than that. And for all the people that want to go to Mars, I say, let them build a spaceship and get on it. Because it'll just make our job a lot easier once they're on their way.
But I don't want to pay for it. Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, John. The way the world works now, we may have a chance to change it. This is the other thing. We may have a chance to change it, but at the way it works now, then we'll pay for it. Okay, I'll chip in. Go. If that's what it takes to get you to go, I'm with you. So leave, and we can get down to business again. Now, one of the things I would like to mention before we adjourn, Marco had posted on the forum right before we went online.
Oh,
That he's been following our discussion. He likes what we're doing. He's bought the book. He's going to read it whenever. But he did say that if I'm talking about here, we Café goers, if we would like to produce something written for publication, he's more than willing to have this put up on metapsychosis. We could do a joint article of one of us could want to do something. I'm only throwing this out so that we start thinking about it. We're going to meet again in a couple of weeks anyhow. But if we would like to kind of summarize what we're doing for those people that aren't going to watch the cafes and aren't going to follow the narrative that has gone on or read the text, they may be willing to read an article that might actually induce them to look at what we've been talking about. But again, because I think that the discussions that we have had over the course of the past few weeks have been very rich and very rewarding, at least for me. And they could be for others. So that's just something, put it in the back of your mind, think about it. We can talk about that again the next time. But I said I would mention it tonight, and so I am. So,
that's an excellent idea.
Yeah, so.
May I ask what kind of text is he looking for? Which makes a summary of what we have talked about?
It could be a summary. It could be a focal. That's something that we could decide on.
I had an interruption.
If there was something.
I didn't understand. I had just a technical interruption. Everything froze. Can you repeat, please? Just in the right moment. Yeah.
Well, when else could it take place?
Yeah,
Timing is everything.
Yeah.
So right. What he was saying is that if we wanted to write an article or a paper about what we've talked about the book, about our responses to that, he would be more than willing to see that we could publish that on metapsychosis. So it could be a summary of our discussion. It could be we could agree on maybe some particular point. I personally think that if we had more than one, there's no reason why there couldn't be a variety of views. They could also be. I just got a message.
I have technical problems. I don't know. Yeah.
I have an open question I would offer to the group in response to that, Ed, and that potential writing assignment that could happen as a group. And this is just a posing a question. I'll post it. If it rings any bells, that would be great. What do you know now that you did not know before you engaged this course or this seminar? And what difference does knowing that make? So I'll just post that. If that assists anyone and prompts their imagination, I would be delighted to hear about that.
That's a good prompt. That's a good prompt.
I like that, John.
Very good.
That's a good place to start. So we won't forget what the offer was, and that's a good hook for that. So does anybody have any last words? It sounds so final. Does anyone have any last words?
I just
read Goethe's biography and it was, he said more light, but nobody was in the room when he said it. So
I was oh boy. I was just going to say that I am highly appreciative of this thread, and today there were some things that come up that I appreciate all of you being witness to. So thank you.
Yeah, I too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought this was a very rich discussion this evening, which is why I stayed in the dark. I don't know what I had to add to this. Okay, so I'm glad that you guys were able
I think
to
they
do
are
that.
becoming longer and longer.
Well, we are slowly edging our way. I mean, decorum dictates that we should try, but you know, it doesn't have to be down to the minute at any rate. So on that, I'll just take that as a good place to close. And I certainly appreciate you all being here. I really enjoyed what everyone had to say and how they had to say it. I think we're all the better for it. And I was encouraged, just to repeat the point that I made, I think we're already doing the things that we would like to see be done. And as long as we continue to do that, I think we're on the right path.
So let's just do more of what we're already doing, but just do it better.
Yeah, why don't
Yes.
we just do what we're doing and not worry about what the other folks think we ought to be doing? You know,
Yeah.
that's never been a big challenge.
I'll drink to that.
All right, okay, good.
Let's go have a beer.
Take care, guys.
All
Take
right,
care.
you guys,
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Have a nice time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Yes, stay healthy.